Today's spoiler video is brought to you by Card Kingdom. Use the link below to pre-order your cards today. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Ikoria spoilers, and good lord, do we have some sweet cards to talk about today, which means we should probably jump right into it, start talking about sweet new Magic cards. But before we get to the new cards, a quick correction from yesterday. So, yesterday, we talked about Loras of the Dream Den, and I kind of underestimated this card. Its restriction is even less than I thought. For some reason, I didn't read it closely enough, and I thought that all the cards in your deck had to have converted mana cost 2 or less. That restriction only refers to permanents, which actually means Loras is even better than I thought. So that's my bad. Just wanted to mention it really quickly. That one's on me. Apologies to you for messing that one up. But Loras, everything I said yesterday, for the most part, is true. Discounting stuff like, oh, you can't play Become Immense because it's too expensive, and it's even better than I made it sound, because the restriction is actually lighter. So if anything, we underestimated how good Loras actually is based on that restriction. Anyway, let's stop talking about old cards, start talking about some sweet new Magic the Gathering cards. Starting with Gotha the Wellspring, and this card I think is in the conversation for best companion. We talked about Loras yesterday. That's definitely the best companion, I think. But Gotha is actually a really powerful companion that isn't that hard to make work. So 5 mana with Gruul Hybrid mana is one of those. You get a 5/5. The companion restriction is no card in your starting deck has more than one of the same mana symbol in its cost. So basically, you can't play double green cards, double red cards, triple blue cards, double Dimir hybrid cards, whatever. All the mana costs in a individual card have to be different. Your reward for meeting this condition is a Gotha that can tap to add a mana of any color, but it can't be used to pay generic mana costs. So you can't like tap this to, I don't know, cast a, let's say, Karn Liberated, because that's all generic mana, so it doesn't help cast that. It only pays for colored costs, essentially. So, Gotha, I think this card is actually one of the easier companions to build around. Yes, there are some cards that you're really going to miss. Just looking at the top 15 creatures in Standard, you're missing out on like Brazen Borrowers, you're missing out on Cavaliers of Thorns, Nightpack Ambushers, so it's not as simple as just slot this into any deck. However, it does have ready-built homes literally across formats because of Niv Mizzet Reborn. Gotha is like the best friend of Niv Mizzet Reborn. It is so incredibly perfect for this deck. So Niv Mizzet Reborn already wants you to play a bunch of weird mana costs. It's a 5-color creature anyway, which means Gotha can cast it all by itself perfectly, and Niv decks across formats are built so you can almost just incidentally slot Gotha into the deck. So starting with Standard, and there actually are Niv decks literally in every format. In Standard, we have Niv Fires decks. In the main deck, I believe you miss out on a couple of Narsets and Time Wipe, which I think you can find a way to replace those. It's not like Narset is the key to the deck. Otherwise, you can just get to free roll Gotha. Then you have Pioneer, which is even easier. You miss out on a single hour of Devastation, which I'm sure you can play another Wrath that is equally as good. And the story in Modern is very similar. In Modern Niv to Light, another semi-tier deck, not top tier, but a legitimate Modern deck, you're missing out on Supreme Verdict. I believe that's the only main deck card that actually breaks that restriction, so it seems incredibly easy to put Gotha into decks. On the other hand, there's so many decks that are really close to being able to play Gotha, like super close. I was thinking of like random Gruul decks, random Ramp decks, but most of those cards have like 1 or 2 cards which break the restriction. A great example is like Gruul Aggro and Embercleave. So Gruul Aggro, incidentally, could play Gotha, except for the fact that you have Embercleave. Is it worth it to not play Embercleave to play Gotha? Probably not. The same is true with like a bunch of ramp style decks, Nissas, Questing Beasts in mid-range decks. So there's a bunch of decks where you're going to have to choose between having this as your extra card companion and playing something that's pretty powerful. It's going to be really interesting to see how the deck building shakes out. I think that Gotha is potentially powerful enough that it could beat out other cards in some decks. just getting a free extra card in your hand, I think is way more powerful than people are realizing. Like, it's hard to underestimate just how strong that is, and I think people are actually underestimating it pretty significantly right now. So maybe it's true that you just dump your questing beast from a random like Gruul mid-range deck just so you get that extra card, that companion, that 5/5 for 5 coming out of sideboard with all the upsides. So we'll have to see. It's going to depend on the individual decks. Another home that I was interested in Jing Gotha for was the Elemental Shell. Elementals used to be good in Standard, kind of faded away. Jing Gotha is an Elemental, so it works with the theme of the tribe, and a lot of the cards in the Elemental decks, Omnaths and Risen Reefs, potentially Thassa's, naturally work with the restriction. On the other hand, you are going to have to make some hard choices, like, is it worth cutting Cavalier of Thorns? Is it worth cutting Agent of Treachery to go with Thassa, or Nissa that makes Elemental lands? I don't know the answer to that, and I think that's the beauty of Jing Gotha, is I feel like it will easily, immediately slot into Niv decks across formats. It's just too easy to make it work in those decks, and it's too good with Niv to pass up. On the other hand, there's a bunch of other decks where I could see Jing Gotha working, but I could also see that it's like not quite good enough to cut that one or two important double mana, triple mana symbol card from your deck. So it's going to be really interesting. This is a good test case for how powerful the companion mechanic is, because it's not a ridiculous restriction to me. A lot of decks are within maybe one or two cards of meeting the restriction. The question is going to be, do they drop those one or two cards, which are admittedly powerful cards, to get the companion Jing Gotha? It's going to be really interesting to find out. I think that people, like I said, might be underrating this mechanic, and it might actually be correct. An extra card in your hand every single game is really, really powerful. We'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see how it actually shakes out, but it's going to be really interesting. I think this is the best test case for the companion mechanic. If Jing Gotha doesn't see play in more than just Niv decks, the restriction is probably just too high in general, and people aren't going to play the companion mechanic. On the other hand, there's a chance that this is pushing really powerful cards, Nissas and Cavaliers and so forth, out of decks just because the companion mechanic is so high. So if you got some thoughts on the right choices with these really tough deck building decisions, let me know in the comments, because I'm very, very curious how this is going to play out. Next up, we need a little bit of a history lesson. So if you've been playing Magic for a long time, you know, back during Shards of Alara, there was the start of the Ultimatum cycle. Kreega Ultimatum, probably the most famous of the bunch, but that was a 3-color set, and each of the 3-color combinations in the set got a 3-color 7-mana effect with ridiculous mana cost, but ridiculously powerful effects. So every color combination got one. However, only 5 color combinations were supported in the set. Well, we learned today that in Ikoria, we are getting the rest of the ultimatums, at least some. We've seen 2 so far. Maybe there'll be more by the time this video actually goes out. We'll see. But anyway, we got new ultimatums to talk about, starting with, oh my goodness, Eerie Ultimatum. And I gotta say, I feel like Wizards really upped the power level on the ultimatums. The original ones, they were good for their day, 10, 12 years ago, but these cards are insane. Eerie Ultimatum, Abzan color, so 2 white, 2 green, 3 black, sorcery, return any number of permanents with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. So this is a spell that can literally reanimate your entire graveyard. It compares to Rise of the Dark Realms, Command the Dreadhorde, Open the Vaults, these mass reanimation effects, except Eerie Ultimatum has arguably less of a downside. It hits any permanent, unlike Rise of the Dark Realm, only hits creatures. Command the Dreadhorde, it loses you life. Eerie Ultimatum does it. Open the Vault affects everyone, is only for artifacts and enchantments. Eerie Ultimatum is personal, it only affects you. The only drawback is it only gets 1 permanent of each name. So if you have a whole playset of Cavalier of Thorns in your graveyard, you're only getting 1 of that, but that doesn't really matter, I don't think. For 7 mana, you are almost always going to get enough value out of this card to make it worth it. The biggest deal is you are getting back all permanent types. This means you get back 1 of each planeswalker in your graveyard. You get back 1 of each land, your Fable Patches, fetch lands, however you're getting them in the graveyard. You're getting back all of your creatures along with artifacts and enchantments, which is absolutely just bonkers. And in Commander in specific, this card is absurd. Because in Commander, you can only play 1 of each card anyway, this is literally 7 mana, return every permanent in your graveyard from the battlefield to play. So if you're playing Abzan Commander, I feel like this is just almost an auto-include, especially if you have some graveyard synergies, which a lot of black-based Commander decks do, so it shouldn't be that hard. You will almost always get your value out of this. Yes, your opponent can play Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace, and blow you out, but outside of, like, graveyard hate, this card is just insane. You can potentially be getting 100 mana worth of permanents onto the battlefield for 7 mana, which is just absolutely ridiculous, and that doesn't even seem seem that far-fetched to me. Like, it shouldn't be that hard to end turn 7 in a Commander game if you're working on filling your graveyard to get that amount of permanents into play. It is just a ridiculous, absolutely absurd effect, and even in Standard, I think it's hard for this to go wrong. Let's say you're just lightly using your graveyard. You're playing a deck that has Cavalier of Thorns. Maybe you got Rotting Regisaur because it's a good creature. Maybe you got some Pelucranoses which want you to support your graveyard. Let's say you cast this and you get back a single Cavalier of Thorns, a single Rotting Regisaur, and a single Pelucranose, which is the absolute floor of this because you'll probably be getting some lands. Maybe you get a Nissa too. Maybe you get, I don't know, some enchantment-based removal that's in your graveyard. But let's say that's the floor. You get back one of each of these creatures. That by itself is more than worth the mana cost of Eerie Ultimatum. And like I said, that is the floor. That is everything goes wrong. That's not including you get back in other formats a bunch of lands in Field of the Dead. You can reanimate all your lands. You get back all your creatures. This card is bonkers. It's one more mana than Open the Vaults, but it gives you back all of your stuff, one of each, of course, and doesn't affect your opponents. This card is just absolutely bonkers. I think this is literally one of the best Commander cards I have ever seen. I'm not even being hyperbolic here. The fact that you get back your entire graveyard of permanents in Commander is just off the charts powerful. I plan on putting this in basically all of my Abzan decks. Of course, if you don't have a lot of permanents, you don't have any graveyard synergies, you're not filling your graveyard at all, there probably are exceptions, but I feel like this is just an absurd card for the Commander format and a really, really powerful ultimatum. Speaking of really powerful ultimatums, ultimatum number 2 is our Sultai ultimatum. So, Emergent Ultimatum, 2 black, 2 blue, triple green. Search your library for 3 mono-colored cards with different names and exile them. An opponent chooses one of those. It gets shuffled back into your library. You get to play the other 2 without playing their mana costs. Then Emergent Ultimatum gets exiled so you can't loop it with Snapcasters or whatever. Get it back, get like whatever. Any of those shenanigans. So, Emergent Ultimatum, this might not look exciting after talking about reanimating literally our entire graveyard for 7 mana, but I think this card is equally bonkers. This is basically a Gifts Ungiven mixed with a Mind's Desire. It's a Gifts Ungiven, 1 less card, but you get to cast 2 of the cards for free. So how do you actually build around Emergent Ultimatum? And I think the answer here is really easy. This is my just first initial gut reaction ways to build around it, and I'm sure there are better ways out there. If you have ideas on how to break Emergent Ultimatum even more, let me know. But picture this. You're playing Commander, you cast Emergent Ultimatum, you get Omniscience, you get Enter the Infinite, and the third card's up for debate. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, let's say. So what does your opponent do here? They can give you Enter the Infinite Jace, you win the game. You draw your deck, you Jace, you uptake, you win the game. They can give you Omniscience, Enter the Infinite, you win the game. Jace goes in your deck, you draw your entire deck, you can cast everything for free. The only realistic option is for your opponent to give you Jace and Omniscience and just hope that that works out. Have you ever seen an Omniscience on the battlefield? That almost never works out. You get card draw from Jace, you have hopefully more cards in your hand, you get to cast everything for free. Eventually you'll draw through your entire deck, win the game anyway. So that was like option 1. Another one that could work really well is the same package but with Expropriate is the second card. With Expropriate, what does your opponent do here? They give you Enter the Infinite Expropriate, you get an extra turn, you have your entire deck, you can cast your Jace or Thassa's Oracle, win the game. Omniscience, Enter the Infinite, again wins you the game. Omniscience, Expropriate, probably gonna win you the game. So it's very easy to build packages of cards in Commander where this is pretty close to 7 mana in the Sultai colors. I win the game. And like I said, there's probably even better options out there. These are my initial 5 minutes of thinking about this card reactions to it. There's probably way more busted combos. So again, if you got ideas, let me know in the comments. In Standard, I think it's pretty easy to get the mana value out of this as well. Let's say you cast this and you get Great Henge, Enray's Forerunners, Nissa. Sure, none of these immediately win you the game, but are you really gonna lose if you end up with Nissa, Great Henge, Enray's Forerunner, Nissa? Probably not. You could also go other colors, get Agent of Treachery, Curibus, Sea God, Bolas' Citadel, steal something, start playing cards off the top of your deck. So Emergent Ultimatum, just really strong as well. After seeing these first 2 ultimatums, I cannot wait to see the rest of them because it feels like Wizards has really pushed the power level of these cards. I will say, something someone mentioned on Twitter is are these cards too good for Commander? And I'm going to say no, just because, well, for 2 reasons. One is they do have a really restrictive mana cost, so that's one thing. The other is, In all honesty, in Commander, there are a lot of sorceries that cost 7 or more mana that if they resolve, they either literally or virtually win the game. So I think these are just added to the list with Insurrections and Rise of the Dark Realms and all the other, like Cyclonic Rifts even, all the other really powerful 7 mana plus effects in Commander. So I think they're insane, and I'm really hyped to play them, and they're going to do busted things. But my first reaction is they're probably not bannably good. We also got another broken 3-color card, Song of Creation. So Song of Creation, 3 mana in the Teamer colors. You can play an extra land each turn. Whenever you cast a spell, draw 2 cards. At the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. So Song of Creation, this is another card that just feels absolutely busted to me. It's kind of like a Rites of Flourishing. Rites of Flourishing gives you the extra land drop, also lets each player draw an extra card each of their turns. The problem is it affects everyone. We've seen some cast a spell, draw a card effects like Beast Whisper for creatures, Riki for legends, but I couldn't find much that was straightforward Song of Creation, just like cast a spell, draw 2 cards. That is absolutely insane. So, of course, this comes with a drawback. You want to do something powerful during the turn you cast this, because you're going to have to discard your hand on the end step, but there are ways to get around this. So as far as Standard is concerned, this feels like a really easy inclusion for the Teamer Adventure deck. The Teamer Adventure deck wants all of these effects. It wants to draw as many cards as possible. And the Adventure mechanic is one way you get around discarding your hand. You're going to have Lovestruck Beasts and Fae of Wishes and all these cards hanging out in your sideboard. So sure, you might have to discard some extra lands or whatever, some stuff that you didn't really need anyway. But then on your next turn, you cast your Lovestruck Beast from exile, trigger your Song of Creation, draw 2 cards, and just start the incredible chain going again. So easy inclusion there. We also have had some really janky fun decks. This is what I want to do with Song of Creation. If you follow the YouTube for a long time, years ago we played Vintage and also Legacy Kobolds, and the idea of that deck was to Glimpse of Nature and then cast as many free creatures as possible. Glimpse of Nature, whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. Well, Song of Creation is like Glimpse of Nature on steroids. Whenever we cast a spell, we draw 2 cards. That means we Ornithopter, we're going to draw 2 cards. Hopefully that hits us another free creature like Crimson Kobolds. We cast that, we draw 2 more cards, hopefully that hits another one, then eventually we cast like a Burning Tree Emissary, some other fast mana, Lotus Petal type stuff, keep drawing cards, Bushwhacker, kill you on the spot as soon as Song of Creation comes into play. So that seems like another amazing way to play this card. So I think this card is just really, really busted. And as I mentioned, even though discard your hand feels like a big drawback, if you think about how this plays, I don't think it's nearly as big of a deal as you think. You can play it with flashback cards. You can play it with adventure cards, which we talked about. There's stuff like Squee that keeps returning to your hand. So the idea is going to be, you play this, you get as much value as possible, you discard your hand, that's fine, but all you need is a spell, most likely, that you can cast from somewhere other than your hand. Think Twice from the graveyard, Squee bouncing back to your hand, Bone Crusher, or any adventure card from exile. If you could set that up, then your next turn, sure, you're going to untap and be empty-handed, you get to draw for your turn, and then you cast your Think Twice, or your Bone Crusher, you draw 2 more cards. That should find you more cheap spells that you can cast to draw more cards, and just kind of like churn through your deck at lightning speed, and then yeah, you'll have to discard your hand again on the end step if you don't win that turn, but then you just do it again the next turn. Cast another Think Twice, or a Bone Crusher, another adventure spell, something along those lines, and just play through a huge chunk of your deck again. So, Song of Creation, I think that the discard your hand downside is actually way easier to get around than it looks like. That seems like a really big restriction, but when you consider the insane power of this card, like every spell you cast, you draw 2 cards, that is absolutely insanely powerful, plus you get an extra land drop as a bonus. I think that it is worth working around that restriction. The card is so powerful, and I'm really scared of this card. I would not be surprised to see that in some format, Modern, Legacy, Pioneer, that there is an absolutely broken combo deck that when you resolve Song of Creation, you just proceed to win the game. That does not seem like a stretch for me. I think the card has that kind of potential, and even just played fairly, you draw a ton of cards. What more could you want than that? Somehow today, we've gotten so many busted cards that our third and final Planeswalker from the set is kind of low on our list of brokenness, even though it's a good one. Narset of the Ancient Way. So Narset, 4 mana Jeskai Planeswalker, comes in with 4 loyalty, +1, you gain 2 life, a red, white, or blue mana, but only spend it on non-creature spells. -2, draw a card, then you may discard a card. So you can just draw a card. If you want to, you can discard a card. If you discard a non-land, it deals damage equal to the card's converted mana cost to target creature or planeswalker. And then -6, you get an emblem whenever you cast a non-creature spell, deals 2 damage to any target. So Narset of the Ancient Way, I think this card is actually very strong. When you think about how this works, +1, maybe best comparison is kind of like Sarkhan. It makes mana. It doesn't draw a card with the +1. The -2 is kind of like a Blast of Genius. Yes, you can't go face, but you still have the ability to choose not to discard a card, which I really like. The may discard a card is huge because you can't just draw if you want to. And then the ultimate, you kind of get an upgraded Gutter Snipe that can also hit creatures. So I feel like all these abilities are pretty powerful. Narset, it's only 4 mana, only takes 2 pluses to get to ultimate. The ultimate, while not immediately game winning, should win the game. You can shoot down your opponent's creatures if you need to stabilize, then go face, kill your opponent with direct damage. It generates card advantage. It kind of does everything you want to in a planeswalker. So where in specific do you play Narset? And I think the answer here is you do have to be a non-creature heavy deck. You don't want to play this in a creature deck. We have planeswalkers that, like our new Vivian, that's definitely for a creature deck. Luca, that's for a creature deck. Narset is the opposite. This wants a deck with a lot of non-creatures. And I think there's a couple of possibilities. The first one that came to mind, and maybe the best home for Narset, is some sort of Jeskai Super Friends list. We have had Jeskai Super Friends, with and without Fires of Invention, be good in Standard at various times since War of the Spark came out. Remember, we still got a million Planeswalkers, we still got Oath of Teferi. Narset seems built for a deck like this. The +1 ramps you into your big Planeswalkers. The -2 allows you to discard extra Planeswalkers. If there's a drawback to playing a bunch of Sarkhans in your deck, let's say, it's that they're legendary and you can get too many in hand, or Oath of Teferi, same way. You can discard those, deal damage, kill something, and draw a new card, which will hopefully not be another Planeswalker, and then the emblem gives you a way to win the game eventually, which you should be able to find one way or another. So it seems perfect for Jeskai Super Friends in Standard. In Commander, if you want to play Super Friends, seems like an easy addition there as well. The other place that Narset will shine is just a straight up control deck. Some sort of Jeskai control, play your card draw spells, stuff like Chemister's Insight, especially good with Narset because you can jumpstart it from the graveyard, so you kind of get a free discard, quote-unquote, with the -2 and 4 damage to something. Counter spells, Narset can close out the game, or like Dream Trawler is in the right colors to close out the game. So Narset in the Ancient Way, I don't think there's a whole lot to say about this one. It's a strong card. You need to be in a non-creature deck to make it good. Planeswalker, Super Friends decks, control style decks, maybe some sort of like spell slingery deck could also work, but that's Narset's home. In those decks, it's a really good Planeswalker. It protects itself, it gains you life against aggro, it ramps you, and then it has an ultimate that will win the game, so really not much more to say about this one. If you're in the right style of deck, Narset is definitely in the conversation for showing up in that deck. We also got Kreega the Orphan Guard, and this is another very interesting companion. Companion has been weird. We started off with companions where the restriction was incredibly high, and I felt like they were not playable, but as we've gotten more and more companions, we've gotten companions that seem easier to play, and Kreega is one of those. It does seem to be in a specific style of deck, but what you get with Kreega is a 1 and double Selesnya hybrid card. It's a legendary cat beast. It's a 3/2, and it has vigilance, and it pumps all of your other cats, elementals, nightmares, dinosaurs, and beasts. Its companion restriction is all your creature cards have to be one of those creature types. So Kreega is essentially a cat lord, also beast, dinosaur, etc., etc., etc. I think cat and also elementals are the two tribes that I'm most excited about Kreega for, but it is a lord for those tribes that's basically a free roll bonus. In a cat tribal deck, you're going to want all your creatures to be cats anyway. In an elemental tribal deck or dinosaur tribal deck, you're going to want all your creatures to be that tribe anyway. So if you're playing one of those tribes, there is almost no cost to playing Kreega as your companion. Yes, you do lose one sideboard slot, but really that is minimal for knowing that you have a lord on turn 3 every single game. Also worth mentioning that Kreega, while if you're playing cat tribal or beast tribal or dinosaur tribal, any of those tribes, you can only have one actual companion, you can still play the other 3 copies in your main deck. So I expect that this is how it would see play. Like you're playing, let's say, cat tribal. You'll play 3 Kreegas in your main deck, probably maybe 2 because it's legendary, and then the 1 free roll 1 in your sideboard slot, and that greatly ups the power of your deck. And we've actually played cats in Pioneer and in Modern, and while they're not a top tier tribe, they are a playable tribe, and they do win games against real decks in those formats. Kreega is just so easy to include in those decks, and it greatly increases the power level. Like, if you're playing a tribal deck, what do you want on turn 3? It's going to be a lord a high percentage of the time. Kreega is going to give you that lord every single time as long as you meet the companion restriction. So cat tribal in Modern, in Pioneer, in Standard, maybe, is going to love Kreega Commander as well. The other place that it's a pretty easy inclusion is the Elemental deck in Standard. Elementals, I don't know if this is something where you'd play 4 in the main deck. Elemental's kind of about generating card advantage more than Lords, but as a free roll 1-of in your sideboard, because your deck already is all Elementals, why wouldn't you just want a random Lord? It's an extra card in your hand. Why would you turn down an extra card in your hand? So maybe this, along with some other new Elementals, can lead to an Elemental resurgence in Standard. Again, doesn't have a very high cost. I guess you can't play Thassa if you're playing the Blink build, but still not a very high cost to make Kreega work. And where it also shines is in Commander. Many of the tribes listed on Kreega, cats, dinosaurs, elementals, beasts and nightmares, I don't know where those really fit in. Those are kind of wait and see tribes. But cats, dinosaurs, and elementals are all playable tribes. And I feel like Kreega is really easy to include in those decks. If you're playing Arabo, because Arabo is so cat-focused, or Gishath is so dinosaur-focused, you're going to want your entire deck to be those creature types anyway. I guess maybe you lose out on like random value cards, like Eternal Witness. You gotta play like a spell-based Eternal Witness, rather than an actual Eternal Witness, some little things like that. But for the most part, you already want all of your cards to be that creature type. So here again, Kreega's just another free roll. You get 101 cards in your Commander deck, you get your Kreega, it's a Lord. Is it insane in Commander? 3-mana Lords are fine. They're not insane, but it's free value. How can you go wrong? So I think Kreega is actually one of the very easiest companions to play. It's narrow in terms of the decks you can play it in. You gotta be cats, you gotta be dinosaurs, you gotta be beasts, nightmares, elementals. Like I said, I think the big ones are really cats, elementals, and then dinosaurs additionally for Commander. I'm sure there's beast decks, I'm sure someone will make a nightmare deck, but those are the big ones. But if you're playing a tribal deck in one of those tribes, you just run this 100% of the time. The cost is basically non-existent, and it's a free Lord. And I think you will run some number if you're playing like cat, tribal, and pioneer or something in your main deck as well, just because it's another Lord, and it's a good Lord. You can't really go wrong with this card. So Kreega, one of the best companions, I think. Of course, is it going to break like tournament tables? Probably not, just because it's unlikely that cats are going to break tournament tables or dinosaurs are going to break tournament tables. But this is something you will play in those tribal decks essentially 100% of the time. It's just would be wrong not to. Finally today, we got a bunch of lower rarity stuff, which we're not going to talk about. This video's already been super long, but if you want to see all the latest previews, check them out over at mtgpreviews.com. Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our daily Ikoria spoilers for today. So, oh my god, I think this might be one of the most busted spoiler days we've had in a long time. What do you think about Song of Creation? How absurd is our new card draw combo X or land drop enchantment? What about the return of Ultimatums? Are they as busted as they look? Kreega, how easy is that to play as your companion? What about Narset? What can that do to Super Friends, to control decks, to other decks? Let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.